All right, welcome back to Blue Line 90. I'm Justin, joined by Tanner today, and we are going to do a little something new here, some quicker segments to hit on some of the things in the news for Michigan football, college football in general. So, the biggest one that is in the news for you Michigan fans right now is Bryce Underwood, the quarterback from Belleville, who has been committed to LSU for quite some time now. There is more than smoke, is what is being said out there, that he has been talking to Michigan. There have been meetings. There have been a lot going. There's been a lot going on there. So wanted to just give an update and talk a little bit about that. I mean, first of all, let's talk about how good this kid is. I
Yeah,
think I wanted to ask you, Tanner, like before we get into where he stands with everything, how big of an impact would getting Bryce Underwood be for Michigan next season?
well, that's kind of a two-faceted question, right? Because it's on the field impact, but it's also what type of talent does he attract if he were to, kind of shock the recruiting world and flip from being committed to LSU to committed to Michigan. Now, that's still a lot of ongoing conversations. I'm sure that I'm not privy to, that a lot of us are not privy to, but like you said, a lot of smoke. When there's smoke, there's fire. But with Bryce, I mean, anytime you go to somebody's 247 page and it's just ones across the board, one nationally, one quarterback, one in the state, like you deal with a big time guy. His high school stats, I think, according to Max Preps, I don't know how accurate they are, but like 61 touchdowns to 4 picks in his high school career. I might be off too. I'm not sure because I think he's played his entire career and they only had his junior and senior stats. So maybe that's off as well. But a guy that, has a huge arm, very accurate, athletic. And I always like to go to on the 24/7 page, the scouting report. And Andrew Ivins, who's the director of scouting at 247 Sports, they always show a projection. So first round for Bryce. But then they do a reminds us of. And, sometimes it'll be like, for like a mid 3-star, like a guy that was pretty good in college, has the potential to be that kind of guy, maybe like a Chase Winovich for Michigan, for example, or, if it's a running back, oh, this guy could be Karat Higdon, whatever. Do you know what his comp is on that website, Justin?
Is it Cam Newton?
It's another guy in a similar mold. It's Vince Young.
Vince Young, pretty good,
So
pretty
not
good
bad.
college player, I would say.
Not bad. So, when you talk about Bryce, I mean, again, number one player in his class, best quarterback in his class. Also, I think pretty unanimous. I'm not sure what sites have him at what, but he's number one in 247's ratings. He's number one on the composite as well. One of those elite can't miss kind of guys. So, and also you couple in the fact that he is 18 miles from Ann Arbor. That drive from the Belleville exit on I-94 over to any of the exits in Ann Arbor is 20
Which
minutes.
I'll say that too. Sometimes that can work in Michigan's favor. Sometimes it can work against Michigan or just any school. If you're that close, sometimes a kid will say, listen, I've been here my whole life. I want to, explore other parts of the country. I want to get out of here, see what else the world has to offer. Sometimes, especially with the family, it can be like, hey, a lot easier for us to drive, 10 miles down 94 to go watch our boy play and go visit his apartment or dorm rather than have to fly to Baton Rouge every weekend, right? So I think sometimes that can go both ways. But let's dive into it here. Tanner, what's the latest on Bryce Underwood and where we're at with him? I still think it's LSU and Michigan in the fold. Who knows now that there's a bunch of news coming out? I'm sure the Oregons of the world and everybody else who is big into the NIL game is, making a phone call, seeing what's going on. But what's going on with LSU and Michigan right now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm the most connected person in the world. But the thing that I thought was interesting, because I follow the message boards and I'm very similar to a lot of our listeners, right? I take in a lot of the content and it's fun, but I try not to get too wrapped up into it. But on Saturday when we were tailgating, I had both a text and in person. Someone told me that he was on campus. Now, there's been nobody saw him at the game. I think, if you see him at the game, like, if he attends the game, unless they somehow
Obviously.
got him into like a suite or something. There's been no reports that he was at the game, but the rumors are, and not only just from the people that have told me, but I've seen a lot of other people say that he was on campus. So, kind of interesting, man. It seems like something they're trying to keep under wraps, right? And try to do move in silence with this scenario. But I've also heard some rumblings, and when I say that, I mean I just read something online, but that Michigan's offer is maybe a lot more liquid than LSU's. LSU's maybe is not as cash heavy of an offer, maybe some more non cash type of value in that NIL deal. So the thing I would say beyond just Bryce Underwood is that I think what this means, and you're starting to see it with some of the movement with a guy like Shamari Earls, who's a top 50 type of kid from Virginia who's committed to Georgia, that Michigan actually lost out on to Georgia over the summer. But I think you're starting to see Michigan have a really kind of concerted effort into, for the right guys, they're willing to dabble in the NIL game, like a lot of the big programs are right now. I think it's taken some time, but I think with Sharon Moore at the helm, knowing how important winning recruitments like this are, being able to go in and be competitive in that space, I think it just shows that Michigan is modernizing its approach. And you've seen that beyond just anything, because we don't know about the NIL stuff, right? Like that all happens. That's not really publicized. But what you can see Michigan doing as you look at the expansion of the recruiting department, there are so many more people there. And you also think about on last Friday, Belleville versus Howell, Sean McGee, who is the GM of Michigan football, right? So he's kind of the point man when it comes to a lot of this stuff with these recruitments. He's down there. Now, Michigan does have a recruit committed from Howell.
You and I joked about this on Saturday as well.
Yeah.
They must really, really like Bobby Conca,
Yes.
who is playing for Howell against Belleville. So kind of joking manner, right? He is he's a good recruit, but I don't know that they're sending the entire staff and the NIL guy to
And
that
Andrew
game
Marsh,
for Bobby Conca. And
right?
Andrew Marsh.
Andrew Marsh was on a he did a live show with Sam Webb and Shamari Earls. But Andrew, he's a 4-star. We talked about him on our show. We wrote up his commitment when he did commit to Michigan back in, I believe, August. He's a top 50 wide receiver, one of the best players in the country. And he was there talking about, real quick, Justin, he was talking about some of the guys that he's got his recruiting hat on for, and it's Bryce. And I think that everybody kind of knew, there were some message board posts, right? But I think that was kind of one of the first times you've heard publicly, like, yeah, this is what it's about. Talking about Shamari Earls and Derek Meadows, who is committed to LSU alongside Bryce Underwood. And Tom Loy last night said that, might be some movement with Meadows if Michigan is able to pull this off.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you just on the Marsh thing with him being there. How big of an impact do you think that has on kids? Because one thing that you and I talked about behind the scenes too, that I don't think the average fan fully realizes, but when you are a 5-star quarterback of the caliber that Bryce Underwood is, when he committed to LSU, they're building around him. Right. They're building a class around him. And so what they do then is they go to wide receivers, they go to running backs, they go to O-line and say, hey, do you want to play with the number 1 quarterback in the nation? And so he has, Bryce, I'm sure, has built up relationships with all those guys. So what I mean by this is for him to flip to Michigan, it would mean that he is turning his back essentially on a lot of those kids that have committed to LSU, which makes it tougher, right? He would have to break promises. I'm sure he's said things to these guys. Again, he's built relationships. But when you see an Andrew Marsh go and be, hey, let's do this together, you have all that, I do think that means a lot.
Yeah, no, I think you very seldom see quarterbacks flip this late in the process and of this caliber. And you saw it last year with Dylan Raiola, right? He was committed to Georgia, flips to Nebraska, kind of a similar thing, right?
Yeah.
But I think with Georgia is kind of a different beast, right? Because they're going to be Georgia, right? They're going to go and get 10 5-stars and be okay. Whereas LSU is a very good program and has won multiple national championships over the last 25 years. But he's a cornerstone guy, right? Like, that's somebody who potentially comes in wherever he goes, aside from maybe a few programs, but he's going to compete to start day one. So I think with, it's a very interesting subject and thing to think about because you just don't see this quite often. But man, if Michigan's able to pull it off, I mean, I still am trying not to get my hopes up, and I'm tempering expectations, but it is one of those things that is not that Michigan needs a program changer necessarily, but like it is completely changing the trajectory of the quarterback room, which then changes the trajectory of your offense, potentially your entire football program when you're able to bring somebody like this in. So it's interesting. Michigan does have a 2025 quarterback commit, Carter Smith, who's a great athlete, maybe a little bit raw as a passer, a guy that can
How
take some time to develop, but
how do you handle that as well when you've got, he's not the number one quarterback in the nation, but he is a four-star, right? So he's not, he's still a very good high school football player. So how do you handle that when it's like, okay, we are obviously trying to get Bryce Underwood, and then you're still telling Carter Smith, who's on campus for that Michigan State game, hey, we still want you here as well. How do you think teams handle that too?
I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, especially now with the NIL, even more so than it has been when it still was a business, it's just extremely cutthroat, right? And it's one of
Yep.
those things where you have to have open lines of communication, just as you would in any sort of industry or any sort of sector of working relationships. I think it's something where it's like, hey, man, it is, you know. Have you seen the 247 cop says Vince Young? Okay. I don't know. I'm sure that's not the conversation, but like, I think Carter Smith is a guy that maybe similar to Zach Gentry, right? Great athlete. Maybe comes in and finds success in another role, or decides to go to another school and be a quarterback elsewhere. But I think if you're Michigan, you absolutely have to take a chance when the communication is open with Bryce Underwood. You have to shoot your shot.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing I do know about the communication between Michigan and Bryce is there have been a number of meetings with both Bryce and the family, and so I think that it is an all encompassing decision for the Underwoods where it's not just Bryce handling this, it's not an agent that's handling this, it is a decision for the entire family, and there have been multiple meetings between Michigan and the family. So Michigan, a lot of times we've talked about it. There's smoke. You never know what's real, what's not. Michigan's making a real push,
Yeah.
right? And they've made a real offer. There is real opportunity for Michigan here. Like I said, if I had to put a number on it, I'd still say it's probably a less than 50% chance that he does flip to Michigan, but I think it's a lot closer to 50% right now than it was a month ago.
Well, and think
Um,
about this too. I mean, LSU coming off the loss to Texas A&M, they've got some still tough games on their schedule. So, a guy that's the head coach there that is not a great culture fit for either side, right? With Brian Kelly. So I
yeah.
don't know what that will look like as far as, he's got, I think like 50 or $60 million guaranteed, right? So he's probably not wanting to leave. But the other thing to consider is that East Carolina's job came open. Their offensive coordinator, Joe Sloan, who they promoted last year when their OC left, is Bryce Underwood's primary recruiter, is an ECU alum. He's kind of like their Jim Harbaugh in a sense that he is, the guy to come home. ECU is a really good group of five program. They have fallen on some hard times recently, but that's a program that absolutely should be competing for that 12th spot in the playoff year in, year out. In my opinion, I think it's a really underrated place. So, maybe the guy that can come turn around is, Joe Sloan, who, if that happens, then you don't know what's going to happen. But if he goes to ECU, like, wow, the fact that Michigan has been working it so hard, you have even better shot to get him to come to Ann Arbor and play his college ball at Michigan. So, yeah, it's
Well,
interesting, but it's it's that's what makes recruiting fun, man. It's just you never know what's going to happen.
that brings up my last point here, which is how is Michigan pitching this to Bryce Underwood based on what is going on the field for Michigan in the quarterback room? They're obviously still running the ball. They're struggling. There isn't, a good slew of receivers that, in on the team right now for Bryce to throw to. What's the pitch? How can you, like, I think if you're sitting here as an LSU fan or just a college football fan in general, you're thinking, how the hell are they even pitching Bryce Underwood to come to Michigan based off of what's going on the field.
Yeah, I think the way that you do that is you say, look, our quarterback room right now is maybe not where we wanted it to be, but did just have on a team where Sharon Moore was the offensive coordinator and Kirk Campbell was the quarterback coach, top 10 pick. A guy who probably be starting right now if he hadn't got hurt in the preseason, and JJ McCarthy. So you can speak to that, but you can also just say, hey, yeah, I mean, we got to try to win games now, and the best recipe for that right now is running the ball. But Bryce, you come here and you've got Andrew Marsh, you've got Jacob Washington, you've got Andrew Olesh, who's the tight end commit. You bring in some friends. Let's sling the rock. Right. So, and I honestly thought Michigan's best passing performance of the season happened on Saturday against Michigan State. Now that's not, that's a low bar to clear, but I thought, they probably did a little bit more to try to show, hey, we want to do this. We want to be able to sling the ball and move the ball up and down the field. We need the guys in place to do it, right? It's Jimmy's and Joe's, not X's and O's. You could give me a star-studded cast at quarterback, running back, receiver, and I could probably try to get at least a few touchdowns on the board as an offensive coordinator. So, I think you could probably speak to, hey, it's about the players, and we're gonna build around you, and we want you to throw the ball.
I definitely think that's true too. Is you mentioned it first, right thing off the bat in this podcast here was, if you get Bryce Underwood, you're going to promise him, hey, not only are we going to get new recruits, from high school, but they're probably going to hit the portal for some wide receivers, for some linemen, some tools that he can work with. And then I also think they're probably saying, hey, listen, your Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullings probably going to move on, right? But you have Ben Hall, you have Jordan Marshall, who are going to be great tools in the backfield for you next year as well. And they can build around that core of guys. So we'll see what happens here. I think, we're getting down to it. I don't totally know the timeline of Bryce's decision. I think it's probably up in the air a little bit now that Michigan's made such a strong push, but we'll keep an eye on this. If you're a Michigan fan, this is a game changer. If Sharon Moore can do this, I think it changes everything that everyone is thinking about him, which, everyone's been a little bit down on Sharon Moore, obviously, because of a rough season here in his first year. But if he can land the number one QB in the nation, number one player of the nation, that changes a lot of people's minds on Sharon Moore. So we'll see how this pans out. And we'll have more for you in, as this proceeds on. But for us, you can follow us at BlueBoy90 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at BlueBoy90 Podcast on YouTube, and BlueBoy90.com. We appreciate you. Go Blue.
Go Blue.